This is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, with me, Danielle and Shano. Joining us now is one of our lovely, lovely friends, Desi Doyen of the Green News Report, of Brad Blog, and of course the broadcast as well on KPFK, and constantly someone you could see on various Young Turks channels and sites. Desi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, great. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, we are very excited to talk to you. And there's so much. It's almost overwhelming that's not getting covered in the news about environmental stuff going on. I almost don't know where to start. I had to pick just a few of the really big stories that would normally be getting, at least I would hope, normally be getting huge attention, but haven't even made it into the news cycle because of this NSA stuff going on.
Well, yeah, and that's, and admittedly, that's a pretty big story. It's a national history kind of changing story. So I can understand that, people are focusing on that. But there are, like you said, so many environment and energy stories out there. Every week, we always have to cut and cull down to just a few things that we can talk about in our short podcast, just to give people an idea of the volume of what's going on. And you can catch all these stories at our website, greennews.bradblog.com. That's specifically for the Green News. Or you can go to bradblog.com, because when you go to the post for each episode, we have tons and tons of other stories that we didn't get to. Fascinating stuff.
Yes. I like all the links you guys always add in addition to the 6 minutes of really big news stories, because it just shows how much we really should be paying attention to this, how many people should be talking about it, because you guys don't have enough time to cover all these issues in 6 minutes.
I know. It's nutty.
My vote is for less Brad, though. He always has the smart comments. We could get to twice as much without Brad. No, I'm just kidding.
I know, but he makes it funny and makes it not quite as depressing.
Two big stories that I cannot believe I didn't hear about until listening to the Green News Report, and then, of course, going and digging for more at greennews.bradblog.com, was there's two big, huge oil spills going on, one in Brazil, one in Canada. So essentially bookending us here in the United States, and we're not hearing anything about it. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in Brazil and Alberta?
Yeah, what's going on in Brazil is that there was a pipeline that runs from Ecuador to the ocean to ports in Brazil, and that pipeline was ruptured in a landslide, and it spilled into the Amazon River, which, of course, everybody knows the mighty Amazon River. It is the drinking water source for millions and millions of people, and they don't really have the equipment. Actually, nobody really has equipment to really do a good job of cleaning up oil. We saw that at the BP oil spill, where we saw that they were using 1970s technology, because the oil companies haven't bothered to improve their oil spill response technology very much. So right now they have done just a little bit to contain the oil spill from that pipeline rupture in Ecuador. Like I said, it's now flowing into Brazil. Brazil is very concerned because that's a drinking water source, not just for drinking water for millions of people, but also for their main source of agriculture water as well.
Well,
so it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this, especially as the Keystone debate is still going on, is this spill originated from a mudslide, correct? And
yes.
I mean, just think about the Keystone pipeline would be running through Oklahoma, where we just had huge monster tornadoes. It's almost like a warning sign of saying, Mother Nature is not going to respect the fact that you have a toxic oil pipeline running through X area.
Right. And what's hilarious, in a sort of a bad way, but hilarious about the State Department's environmental assessment that they were required to put out for the new route for the Keystone XL pipeline. That's part of the reason why it's been delayed, thankfully. But one of the things that the State Department considered in that environmental impact report was the impact of climate change on the pipeline. Not the pipeline's impact on climate change, but, hey, how would increased flooding, for example, hit the pipeline? Will the pipeline be okay with climate change? that was, I thought, absurd and ridiculous. That was the thing that they were focused on instead of, the increased carbon emissions that would result from digging up the tar sands, which should remain in the ground.
Right. I hate to even laugh because it really is sad that that's how they would take it from that perspective. But it's one of those, if you don't laugh, you'll cry.
I know.
So what's going on in
it's
Alberta?
Really like the impact of fires too on this pipeline would also not be a good thing. But yes, so anyway, moving up to Alberta, Canada, obviously, where the tar sands begin. It's a massive, massive development. If you've ever seen Avatar and that mining operation that they have in Avatar with the gigantic trucks, those are not fake trucks. Those are the actual dump trucks and digging equipment used in Alberta for the tar sands development. James Cameron went there and based his Avatar mining operation on the Alberta tar sands development. So that gives you a sense of the scale. It doesn't give you a sense of the destruction that comes from it or the amount of waste that comes from it. I mean, the tar sands cover, I forget how many square miles. It's like the size of a small city. And the toxic wastewater that comes from the way that the tar sands are extracted. They have a couple of different ways of doing it. One is just straight mining where they dig it up and pull it out. Another is where they send down superheated water with chemicals, and that sort of melts the tar sands away from the sands. It melts them and makes them more liquid, and then they pump that out. And it's just filled with toxic chemicals that make the tar sands flow more easily. So with that comes a great deal of toxic wastewater. And this toxic wastewater has to be stored away from drinking water supply sources and taken out of the hydrological cycle because it's toxic. And what's happened now is that there is a 2.4 million gallon spill. It's 9.5 million liters for those that understand the metric system. I go to gallons because that to me is easier. If you can imagine 2.4 million gallons of milk, then that's how big this toxic wastewater spill in Alberta is. And this is the third major leak in this region. And so the residents are all really not happy at all about the fact that the Alberta tar sands companies seem to be unable to keep their toxic pollution away, is to follow through basically on the promises that they made and that they said, well, we can keep this from impacting you. Obviously they can't. I mean, they're calling this 2.4 million gallons of toxic wastewater. They're calling it the worst, basically worst fossil fuel disaster onshore in North American history.
Wow. And according to reading what I found on the Green News report at greennews.bradblog.com, this was spotted on June 1st, but if I'm reading this correctly, it took the government a little while to notify residents and people living in the area about it. And they've also said, and I'm reading a direct quote here, every plant and tree in the area that was touched died.
Yes, and that's from the First Nations. They are the Native American tribes that are up there. And they actually have a lot more pull with the government than the Native American tribes do in the United States. So Canada, at the nature of their treaties with the First Nations, gives them quite a bit more sovereignty and control. And so, for them to come out and say, everything died here, you guys need to do something about it, they might actually get some action. Although the Cameron government, the Cameron administration, is conservative, and they are pretty much doing whatever they can to override the First Nations, to shut their scientists up. They're Canadian federal scientists who are all saying this is a bad idea, this tar sands development and these pipelines.
But how do you deny that every tree died? I mean, how do you deny how toxic something is when, the beginning of this article is that all the treetops are brown, that every plant in the area is now dead because of this toxic, radioactive, horrible sludge that they are pumping out of the ground.
It's poisonous. It has high levels of salt, for one thing, and sulfur compounds, which means that that the soil has been killed. So this soil is not coming back, and it would take incredible, expensive, long-term remediation of the area, environmental remediation to bring the soil back to life. That soil is now toxic and dead.
Wow.
And cannot support life. So this is a big problem, the fact that they can't deal with the wastewater that they have. They say that they can, but then they keep screwing up. And frankly, the oil industry is the oil industry's worst enemy because they're bad players.
Exactly. When people are saying that this type of fossil fuel extraction is destroying the planet, they're not speaking figuratively. You know, they're saying this can literally make soil unlivable, make water unable to sustain life. That is a literal interpretation that they are destroying the planet.
I know, and it sort of boggles the mind because, you know, you and I look at it and we think this is completely illogical. This is insane. You know, for example, when you look at, say, the fracking operations, you know, that controversial natural gas drilling technique of fracking, it can also be used to drill oil. It also produces millions of gallons of toxic wastewater that they have to inject underground, or if it comes back up, they have to take it to wastewater treatment facilities. Because essentially, when you inject this poisonous, toxic water underground or put it into a tailings pond like the Alberta tar sands do, that's where they put their mining waste, it's called a tailings pond, they take that water, that fresh water, out of the hydrological cycle forever. Now, remember from elementary school science, only 2% of the world's water supply is fresh water. And remember, we also have dozens of water conflicts around the world because of lack of fresh water. And in the West, we have a big drought going on right now where people are competing with with the oil industry for water.
Wow.
And the fact that this takes the water out of the cycle, takes it out of the rainfall, you know, and evaporation cycle that we all learned in school, takes it out forever.
That is
seems
astonishing.
To me insane.
Especially, you know, you bring up drought, and it was another huge story that I've seen little tiny blips of on the news, but definitely not enough of the coverage as it deserves, is the huge forest fire going on in Black Forest, Colorado, now the most destructive in state history. I saw that the article I have in front of me says 360 homes destroyed, but I believe I saw this morning or yesterday that number has already increased as well.
Yeah, I think it's up to 374, I believe now. So remember, last year there was the Waldo Canyon fire that was it was west of Colorado Springs. The Waldo Canyon fire became, at that point, the most destructive in Colorado history because of the amount of economic damage that went with it, the number of building structures destroyed. Now, this year, 1 year later, they have broken that record again for the most destructive. You know, and 2 people have already been found dead. They were unable to get out in time. It's a very, very sad situation because this keeps happening. There are now 4 major fires going on in Colorado right now that are really straining their resources to be able to actively fight fires.
And from what I read just to remind everybody, we're speaking with Desi Doyen of the Green News Report. You can check it out at greennews.bradblog.com. You can follow along on Twitter at Green News Report. And, of course, you can hear it on, I can only think how many radio stations, online stations, terrestrial stations, all over the place. You can always find it.
Yes, we're on the Progressive Voices app as well. So they play the Green News Report quite a bit. So if you're listening to Progressive Voices, you'll definitely hear our latest reports.
Awesome. I forgot what I was going to say here.
We were talking about the fires and
yes.
how there are 4 fires
it's
now burning in Colorado. Oh, and I also meant to mention real quick is that the budget cuts due to the sequester have impacted every agency, especially the emergency management agencies and the National Weather Service agencies. You know, the National Weather Service has had to cut employees who do forecasting of, you know, difficult storms that are coming up. That's kind of a problem. And then the National Forest Service, the U.S. Forest Service chief testified before Congress last week and told them, you know, this budget cuts due to sequester means that we have to cut back on the number of firefighters we have, federal firefighters. We've had to not hire 500 federal firefighters to assist the states, and we're having to cut back on our engines because we don't have the money because of the sequester. We're having to take the money from our prevention and mitigation programs, the ones that make sure that these fires don't get so bad in the future. We have to take the money from that to pay for active firefighting now, and that is also a problem.
So you have climate change, you know, hotter temperatures, drier air, changing weather patterns, making the risk of these firefighters and the size and destruction of these firefighters much, much worse. And you have sequester cutting budgets for firefighters, prevention, et cetera. It seems like this is a repetitive pattern, Desi. You know, we see monster storms, but we refuse to accept that they have anything to do with climate change. We're seeing these monster fires, monster droughts. What is it going to take for people to wake up and realize that these are related to pumping all this toxic pollution into the atmosphere?
Well, it's a good question because we do see in polling, recent polling, now that there have been so many extreme and intense weather events happening so frequently. Every new extreme weather event, drought, flood, fire, is something, or heat wave, the American people are sort of catching on. Hey, wait, didn't you just hit that record last year? Didn't we just break the record for the opposite extreme last year? So people are getting the connection now between extreme weather and climate change. Extreme weather, more frequent and intense. Extreme weather was predicted by climate scientists years ago, and that was sort of the first signpost that they had predicted would happen of a changing climate. So I think when you look now at polls, they're starting to show some resilience and sort of a floor, a base floor, below which most Americans don't fall. So if that makes sense, most people are starting to get that idea. When you poll Americans, more than half of them now think that climate change is real and that these extreme weather events are related. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the 29% or so that are self-identified generally as right-wing nut jobs, they don't call themselves that, but I do, they're the ones that are the holdup that are holding us back from taking action on climate change and clean energy because they're beholden to fossil fuels. Of course, we have all the Tea Party groups that are really, most of them are funded by the Koch brothers or other fossil fuel interests that then put that money, launder that money through nonprofit organizations that then pay for those front groups to advocate on their behalf. So they're the ones that are holding us back from a clean energy revolution and from addressing these really difficult situations that are only going to get worse as the climate warms. As more pollution gets pumped into the atmosphere, it traps more of the energy. We get more moisture, more heat energy in our weather. That's what's driving these crazy extreme weather events.
Well, Desi, I really appreciate you taking time with us. Half of Americans understand this problem and understand we need to address it. If we could now only get half of Congress members to do the same thing, I think we'd really be getting somewhere. I think we should all make them sit down and listen to the Green News Report every single week and learn something. I think they would be better off.
I would definitely agree with that. And the important thing is to keep talking about it, just like you guys are doing. Every single person, it's a person-to-person democracy. You got to let folks know. So what you guys are doing is very important. So thanks for having me on to talk about these really important issues.
Absolutely. And we couldn't do that coverage without all of the great information you provide us. So, Desi, thank you again. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks. Desi Doyen, the one and only, the lovely, and the just amazing reporter over at Green News Report. She writes it, she records it, she's awesome. You have to check it out if you don't know of it already. Although you probably hear it here on Talking Left.
Like two
times a show.
Well, we because they produce. You should check it out twice a week because it's Tuesday and Thursday.
Right.
Is when they usually come out.
Right, but you could check it out anytime.
Yeah,
you
anytime.
can go over
Stitcher.
there and listen right now. So we're going to be back with more right here on Talking Left. You're listening to me, Danielle and Shano, and we have Brad Friedman, also of the Brad blog, coming up pretty soon. Stick around.
Hey, it's Hal Sparks from the Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide, and this is Talking Left.
It's back. The Patriot Act, a grotesque, ever-mutating, hydra-headed monstrosity from the Bush-Cheney Little Shop of Horrors, has risen again, this time with an added twist of Orwellian intrusiveness from the Obamacans. Since 2006, Team Bush and then Team Obama have allowed the little-known, hugely powerful National Security Agency to run a daily dragnet through your and my phone calls. All on the hush-hush, of course, not informing us spyees. Now exposed, leaders of both parties are pointing to the Patriot Act, saying that it makes this wholesale, everyday invasion of our privacy perfectly legal. When the story broke, Obama dissembled, calling these massive and routine violations of the Fourth Amendment modest intrusions that are worth us doing to make us more secure. He added disingenuously that Congress is regularly briefed about the program. In fact, only a handful of members are briefed, and they have been flatly lied to by Obama's Director of National Intelligence. Yet, Senator Dianne Feinstein loyally defends spying on Americans, claiming it protects us from terrorists. But then, she admitted she really doesn't know how the mountains of data are being used. This is nothing but a bottomless trust us swamp, created by the panicky passage and irresponsible reauthorization of the Patriot Act. Secretly seizing everyone's phone records is, as the ACLU put it, beyond Orwellian. As the New York Times editorial flatly and rightly says, the administration has now lost all credibility on this issue. But no administration can be trusted to restrain itself from abusing the unlimited power of the Patriot Act. This is Jim Hightower saying, it's not enough to fight NSA's outrageously invasive spying on us. The Patriot Act itself is a shameful betrayal of America's ideals, and it must be repealed.
If you like these feisty pops of populism that Hightower zings out on the airwaves, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter provides the in-depth lowdown on what the greed heads of Wall Street and the boneheads of Washington are doing to us behind the scenes. With Hightower's saucy Texas humor and truth-telling populist perspective, the lowdown literally can lift you up. And get this, you can have the lowdown delivered to your mailbox or email each month for only $15 a year. Yes, 12 issues, only $15. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Schuster, your host of Take Action News. On our show, we talk government, politics, and what you can do to have an impact. We're nonpartisan, report like hell, and let the chips fall where they may. We feature segments like social media, activists of the week, and the latest news affecting our communities. So join us every Saturday and make a difference. Yes, you and I, we can do this. That's Take Action News on the air, online, and at your podcast convenience on iTunes each week on the We Act Radio Network.
This is Nnamdi Asamoah. I play football for the Philadelphia Eagles, but what I do off the field with United Way might be more important. I'm a volunteer tutor and mentor. Why? Because over 1 million kids a year drop out of school, and that's not okay. It takes 12 years to create a graduate, but it takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be me, or it could be you. Studies show that if we get to these kids earlier, their chances are better. And kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. So join me in United Way. Suit up and take the pledge. Become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor. Because when a child succeeds, we all succeed. Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Take the pledge at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way, the Ad Council, and the National Football League.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thank you again to Miss Desi Doyen of the Green News Report. She is amazing. And after all of that news that may have your blood boiling a little bit about environmental stuff, we wanted to just quickly mention something good that happened in environmental news. Maine House of Representatives has voted to support GMO labeling.
Yay!
Now, this is a small step. It still has to go through the Maine Senate, but it looks likely to pass. And just like Connecticut, which passed recently, Maine will wait until other states around it, until there's 5 states total that have similar legislations before enforcing it.
And why?
Because they want to create a kind of coalition of states, make it more expensive, more difficult for Monsanto to hold all these legal battles and say, it's you can't prevent us from hiding our GMOs.
And the amazing thing is, think about that. In order to be as strong as Monsanto,
a corporation,
a corporation in the court, it can't be 1 state or 2 states or 3 states. It has to be 5 states.
5 states.
So tell me that company is not too darn big.
Exactly. Tell me that's not a problem.
Are you kidding me?
Right.
You know, you can't fight City Hall. Monsanto is bigger than 5 states.
But I think we are at the precipice of seeing this actually happen. You saw this just happened in Connecticut. It's now happened in Maine. It looks like it's going to be finalized in Maine.
Yeah, and let's dump the Monsanto Protection Act, too, so that...
Hey, let it expire. Don't renew it. I'll settle for that. But, it's also being considered in Vermont, Massachusetts, and New York. So right there, you could have your 5-state coalition to, start this process. It's that far away. We could do it. I think it's good news. We're going to come right back with Brad Friedman and talk to him about his amazing interview with Daniel Ellsberg about Edward Snowden. We'll be right back.
Confound it. You're right. It's brilliant.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
It's our last errand today, Jimmy. Just need to pick up some light bulbs.
Whoa, there's so many. Did Grandma tell you which ones to buy?
No, but check out the label on this package. It'll help us find the right bulbs.
Does it really matter?
Well, sure. The new light bulbs use a lot less energy, so we save money on our electric bill by using an energy-saving incandescent, CFL, or LED.
How about this bulb?
Let's see. We need to replace the 60-watt bulbs in our bedside lamps. That one is 800 lumens, so it should do the trick.
I've never heard of lumens.
Lumens tell us how bright the light is. The more lumens, the brighter the bulb.
You know, Grandpa, you're a pretty bright guy.
Yeah, you're pretty smart yourself, Jimmy.
Lumens, the new way to shop for light. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov. That's EnergySavers.gov. A message from the U.S. Department of Energy.
You may be hearing about people having trouble making mortgage payments and risking losing their homes. Many of them just aren't aware of the options that can prevent foreclosure. There are many options available to homeowners, such as repayment and forbearance plans, loan modifications, and even refinancing. Where does someone go for help? They should talk directly with their lender or a qualified HUD-approved counseling agency. Both can provide helpful information without charging a fee. According to PMI Mortgage Insurance Company, it's not a good idea to pay for services that you can get for free from a lender or a qualified nonprofit counseling agency. To learn more, visit homesafepmi.com or call HUD at 1-800-569-4287 for a counseling agency near you. That's 1-800-569-4287. This message is brought to you by PMI, supporting sustainable home ownership that strengthens communities.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at WEAC Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast D.C.
This is Stephanie Miller.
Hi, this is Tom Harmon.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Schuster of Take Action News.
I'm Brad Friedman of BradBlog.com.
Hi, I'm cartoonist and agent provocateur P.S. Mueller.
This is Nicole Bell of CrooksandLiars.com, and this is...
You're listening to
and watching
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Great presidents aren't born, they are made. We've got to push people. They don't jump out in front of a parade if there's not a parade there. That is political suicide. The parade, metaphorically, already has to be in the streets with the picket signs saying, we need progressive talk in Portland, or we need marriage equality in Washington, or we need marijuana legalization in Colorado, whatever.
Trans-Canada Pipeline.
Stop
the pipeline.
We have to push for our positions because they're not just going to out of thin air.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Joining us now is Mr. Brad Friedman, a great friend and the editor-in-chief of the Brad Blog and the host of the Bradcast on KPFK. You can check it out at bradblog.com, and you can follow along on Twitter at the Brad Blog. Brad, thank you so much for hanging out with us this morning, and thanks for getting up so early.
Hey, good morning. Glad to be here with you. And I want to
apologize in advance on behalf of Brad Blog and of the Green News Report for my co-host, Desi Doyen, in the last segment. I didn't hear it, but I'm presuming it didn't go well. So I just want to apologize for that right now.
She's a tough act to follow, Brad, and I don't blame you for trying to play her amazing brilliance down a little bit.
Yeah, if you say so.
Brad, you recently spoke with a pretty much a legend as far as whistleblowing, government transparency, all of that is concerned. Daniel Ellsberg, he was the legendary whistleblower of the Pentagon Papers, and you did a great interview on KPFK. Everybody can check it out and listen to that over at bradblog.com. But I just want to commend you, first of all, for having the genius to interview Ellsberg regarding Edward Snowden, the whistleblower on the NSA.
Well, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the interview. I did too. He was sort of invoked here in one of the Guardian's first articles on Edward Snowden, where they, said that Snowden's disclosures were the most consequential since Daniel Ellsberg and Bradley Manning. And obviously, we can't speak to Bradley Manning right now. He's in the brig, facing trial, unaccessible, can't tell his side of the story. But then there was Dan Ellsberg, who I've spoken to a number of times over the years in the past. He's even guest blogged at Brad Blog once or twice over the years. Seemed like the natural person to talk to get a sense of just what Ed Snowden must be going through right now, from, Ellsberg being one of the very few people in the world who understand what it's like to have an entire nation, an entire presidential administration out to get you, out against you. And so he was able to offer a very unique perspective in that regard. And one of the things among many that sort of jumped out to me was that, Dan Ellsberg pointed out that back in the 70s, when he released the Pentagon Papers and the Nixon administration tried to break into his psychiatrist's office, steal his medical records to try to use against him, to blackmail him, when Nixon ordered that he be, quote, unquote, eliminated. Ellsberg pointed out that back then, all of those things were illegal. And now, not so much. And that's something very different that Edward Snowden is now facing, that Dan Ellsberg didn't. And it was kind of chilling, actually, when he put it in that frame.
It really is, especially considering the really vague definitions in documents like the Patriot Act and authorization for use of military force. I mean, based on those really loose definitions and Dan Ellsberg's warnings here, I mean, Snowden could be considered a terrorist and could be drone bombed by President Obama. I mean, that is not out of the realm of possibilities. And how Ellsberg addressed that was amazing, and comparing it with the church investigation, church hearing. And he said, he quoted Church, I believe, that is the abyss from which there is no return, and says that we are in that abyss now. Can you break that down a little bit for listeners?
Yeah, that was Frank Church, was a Democrat from Idaho. Senator Frank Church led the Church Committee back in 1975. It was sort of the precursor to what has now become the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee. And what the Church Committee did was they looked at the abuses of the NSA, of the CIA, of the FBI, back during the Watergate era, when, like I said, he was using, the president was using these agencies to commit all sorts of unlawful acts. And this national security surveillance state was just out of control, and the Church Committee ended up reining in a lot of this unchecked power that these organizations had. And at the time, Frank Church had warned that if there is not oversight, if these agencies are allowed to operate in complete secrecy with no checks and balances, then the amount of power they will be able to amass will be an abyss from which we will not be able to return. And Ellsberg said directly, when I asked him about that quote, he said, "We are in that abyss." And that's where we now are. And, it's exactly what Frank Church warned about. And, it's exactly what whistleblowers have been warning about, not just Edward Snowden, but, several of them going back the last 10 or 15 years, trying to ring the bell, blow the whistle about what is going on in what has become this massive, privatized, I should add, surveillance state in this country, and the dangers and the power that they have if they are not checked. And this is something that even Senators Wyden and Udall, who are on the Senate Intelligence Committee, who are on the committee that is supposed to oversee these secret programs, even they were out yelling and screaming now for years about these programs, trying to get more transparency, trying to help the public understand that the way these public laws were being interpreted in secret was not the way that most people, had understood the law, that there was a huge difference, they wrote, between the way the laws were interpreted by the secret Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and the way the laws were actually written. So even the people who had oversight, the people who we supposedly trust to oversee these programs and these agencies, were yelling and screaming that we have a problem here, but we could do nothing about it. So it takes an Edward Snowden, frankly, to come out, reveal this information, reveal these documents, let everybody know what is, really going on behind closed doors before there is any action taken. One of the things that has been somewhat, amusing, ironic for me to look at over the past week or so is that even the detractors of Edward Snowden and of Glenn Greenwald for having the temerity to be a journalist and report on these things, even their detractors have said, but we need to have a national conversation, a national debate about these things. What is unclear to me is how the hell we're supposed to have a national debate about these things if they're done in secret and nobody tells us about them. So to that end, I think we all have to thank Edward Snowden and Glenn Greenwald, no matter what you feel about either of them.
Yeah, I think you summed up something I was trying to say earlier in the show much better than I was able to. But you put that piece together very well. Just to remind everybody, we're speaking with Brad Friedman, editor-in-chief of the Brad blog, host of the Bradcast on KPFK, and we're discussing your interview with Dan Ellsberg, the whistleblower of the Pentagon Papers. There was something Ellsberg said I want to specifically get your opinion on. If it continues this way, I think it makes democracy essentially impossible or meaningless. Now, Brad, you are a defender, a fighter of our democracy, constantly protecting our right to vote, our right to voice our opinion, our thoughts in a democratic way. So I think you're the perfect person to ask. How does this government spying, this secret court, the fact that political dissent may be very difficult if we're being spied on, how does that affect our preservation of democracy?
It absolutely turns democracy, representative democracy, on its head. And, that's why I have an interest in cases like this. And, and people, of course, they know me from my, coverage of actual elections, voting machines, things like that. But, and they think that's what I specialize in. No, I specialize in democracy.
Right.
And this is exactly that. This is an issue of democracy. When you have these privatized operations, and Ellsberg pointed out during the interview that 70% of our national security state has now been privatized, private companies who are accountable to no one, who cannot be overseen by the public, who operate under secret laws and secret provisions that are secretly interpreted by a secret court, overseen only sometimes maybe by congressional committees that must operate in secret, who, if they have a problem with the programs, can do nothing about it because it's all secret. I mean, this turns the very idea of democracy on its head. It is, the opposite of democracy, and that's why these things, among many reasons, are a problem. We, the public, need to oversee these systems. And when things like this are done, now look, there's perfectly understandable reasons that certain things must be kept secret. But right now we've got such a wildly overclassified state. Everything is classified. And, the only people who are allowed to leak, apparently, are people within the administration who leak things they want to leak, even though their leaks are also in violation of the same laws that are supposedly violated when a guy like Edward Snowden leaks the same information. So you've got the government leaking what they want to leak and prosecuting anybody who leaks what they don't want to leak. I mean, that's a secret police state. That's, downright Soviet. That is the opposite of democracy. And people need to understand that. They really do. And, and the dangers that are inherent here, because these private companies who are using taxpayer money, government dollars, to do this stuff, to develop programs to, supposedly track terrorist networks, then take that very same software they have and they apply it to you and me. And that was done directly to myself and to Glenn Greenwald by a number of defense contractors who had developed tools for the war on terror and decided to use it against me and against Glenn Greenwald. In my part, it was on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. On Glenn's part, it was on behalf of the Bank of America. So they're willing to, sell these tools that they've developed on government money. They need to make more money out of them, apparently, because they're willing to sell them to private corporations to go after private Americans. There are so many dangers here with this system, and for people to not understand that and to marginalize these things simply because they happened under a president they may admire is absolutely insane, hypocritical, and incredibly short-sighted.
Well, in just the minute or so we have left, Brad, do you think that these revelations are going to change anything? Is there any way to rein this NSA stuff back in, or is the genie out of the bottle, so to speak?
The genie is way out of the bottle. It's going to be hard to rein it in, but if we have a chance of reining it in, this is how it happens. This is how things change. It is because of these leaks, that we now have a bipartisan a bill that has been filed to remove the secrecy over the FISA court and their opinions so those documents can come out. You've got the companies begging and pleading the government to allow them to be more transparent about what is and isn't going on with this PRISM system. You've got many more senators and congressmen now begging the intelligence officials for additional briefings about what the hell is going on. So this is how things change. And that's why whistleblowers are important. And Barack Obama strongly agrees with me, or at least he did before he became president, because when he ran for president, he was insisting that whistleblowers should be lauded and that they are great patriots. And I'm going to go on record agreeing with Barack Obama of 2008.
Well, hopefully he's out there somewhere and he's listening and he will make a reappearance. But I want everybody to go over to the Brad blog, bradblog.com, and check out your amazing interview with Dan Ellsberg. Really top-notch stuff, Brad. You always do amazing coverage and amazing work. This just blew my mind a little bit, and I'm really, really honored to speak with you about it.
Thanks, Danielle. You're very kind. You're too kind, but I'll take it. I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back and talk to you again soon.
Look forward to it.
Okay. Brad Friedman, editor-in-chief of the Brad blog, defender of our democracy, doing amazing work over at the Brad blog. All those links, including his interview with Dan Ellsberg, will be up with our blog post after the show. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Lots more in store today, so stick around.
Holy crap! We'll have more on these new developments after this.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.